Hello, everyone. This is Nayiri from Low Carbon Fasting. Okay, today's guest is an American writer. She's public speaker, food activist, environmental activist, and activist for women's rights. She's also the author of The Vegetarian Myth. I've invited her today so we can discuss the vegetarian myth. And this was something I've been looking forward to for at least 3 years.
Oh,
Lierre Keith, welcome to Low Carbon Fasting.
well, thanks for having me on the show.
So it was 3 years ago that I transitioned from 30 years of vegetarianism to meat eating. I'm omnivore. However, reintroducing meat was challenging. And someone, I think, in my community recommended that I read your book. I had it on my to-read list, and I had your name on my to-invite list. I never got around to it. I was busy, until I saw you last year speak at the PHC conference here in London.
Oh, yeah, that was a
You know,
great conference.
I was watching it virtually because I was in Canada at the
Uh,
time. So when I heard you speak on stage, I wrote you on Messenger straight away saying, Lierre, please come to my channel, but just give me a few more months so I can finish. I hadn't even started reading your book. So I can read your book. We can have good content to talk about. So thank you so much for coming.
well, you're very welcome.
Okay, so I love how eloquent you are and very clear in the points you're trying to make. So I love the poetic kind of style. I just can read some of your quotes. I've picked the most poetic, the most poignant ones, and I will read them during this conversation. Let's start with chapter 1, Lierre. Now, chapter 1, clearly you're giving your reasons why you gave up on vegetarianism. What are your reasons? What were your reasons?
Uh, why I became a vegan or why I gave it up?
Why you gave it up?
For me, it was because my health collapsed catastrophically. I did it for almost 20 years, and by the end of it, I had done permanent damage to my body. So it's a long, hard process. You know, when you're in that far to something like veganism, it's really hard to get yourself back out because it the thing about being a vegan is that it's never just what you eat. You know, it becomes who you are. And so when there's any, counter information, when there's anything that's confusing or seems contradictory, or indeed when you start to have bad health effects from this diet, it is really hard to face that. I ran. I mean, I just kept running away emotionally from the truth of what was happening to me because it just couldn't be true. So you're like, you think that reality, that you can sort of bend it into shape, with ideology, like it's, the sledgehammer, you just keep going at it. And reality wins. Like you're not going to bend it to your will, no matter how much you think you're doing the right thing or, for whatever reasons. And I had really huge reasons for wanting to do this. So it was a hard 2 years getting out of that. But that was the reason why, was because I had done such damage to my body that there was just no way. There was just no way to continue. So I had to face the facts that this wasn't actually what it was all cracked up to be. And then, there's this long period of like you're living in the rubble, and it's not even just, well, maybe I was wrong about some things. For me, it was a catastrophic level of collapse, just in terms of who was I and who was I in the universe. Like it was huge. It was cosmic. Like what is the meaning of my life here if indeed I have to kill animals to survive? Because for all those years, the most important thing to me was I'm doing no harm to other creatures. Well, as it turns out, this diet doesn't do that in any way. There's plenty of dead animals in your food, But you can keep shoving that aside if they're not actually on your plate. And that was what I kept doing. So all the information that I was assembling about, the nature of agriculture and how destructive it is, and like on and on, I just couldn't look at it. It was like, well, okay, maybe that's true, but I can't think about it. So I just learning and then shoving aside was pretty much what I did for 20 years. And then, that day comes, and then there was just this horrible year or two of trying to put it all back together, because my sister laughs at me and says, you wanted God to be a just God. And I did. I wanted my life to be possible without hurting any living creature. And that is not the nature of physical reality. The moment you take birth, as the Buddhists say, the moment that you are here as a creature, you need food, you need energy. And every living creature depends on the death of others. It's the exact moment that one life is a death, is a life, is a death. And that is just this cycle. So at the end, I had to accept that and then try to embrace it. And that gave me a great deal of solace. But it was also just really hard, because I still have days it's like, why can't I just live on sunlight? I don't understand. And you can't. This is not an option that living beings have. Nobody lives on just sunlight. It's not a thing we can do. So you have to go some other direction with this, because that's just reality. So I don't know if that answers your
Yeah,
question.
you said 20 years. So were you vegetarian or like
No, I went right. I was all in. I was just vegan. That was it.
vegan?
Yeah.
For
Which is
20
really hard because you're starving the whole time.
you're
Your
starving.
your brain in particular is so starved for fat. Like the cravings would just, there were moments just that were really like white knuckling it. And then I would have these terrible moments where I'd, quote, cheat. And then you feel terribly guilty about it, and so oh no, I'll never do that again. And then, 2 years go by and you haven't even looked at an animal product, but it's really hard because it's starvation. And so if you're in that world, there's like all these bizarre explanations for why you have these cravings. And it's all a way around facing the fact that you're starving yourself, and that this is actually your body's, innate will to survive telling you, please, please just give me some animal fat. Like my brain is collapsing. We can't continue without some help from you. So would you please give us some proper food? And the cravings are just overwhelming sometimes for that reason. And again, it's like, oh, it's cheating. Oh, it's an emotional addiction. Oh, it's like you just have the craziest excuses. And on that day, when you walk out of it and then, you start to assemble some better information, it all just makes sense. You're like, well, of course I had tremendous cravings for animal fat.
You were
Humans we're carnivores essentially, but also I'm female and I need that fat. If I'm going to reproduce. So your body is, directing you toward the correct food. And as when you're eating one of these bizarre low fat diets, which humans have never done before. I mean, this is all very new for us, as a species. You're going to have these horrible cravings and they will wreck your life. I mean, it'll just take over sometimes and you won't understand why.
What brought you into the vegan world though? Because you weren't raised as a vegan.
No, I wasn't. It was completely just standard American diet. Though I will say that my mom at least tried to keep the worst junk food out of the house. Like we didn't have soda. We didn't eat candy bars. Like there's a lot of stuff that my mom was like, nope, not doing it. And we never went to fast food restaurants. Like that was a huge treat that happened maybe once a year. And she didn't put up with any nonsense about it either. So we knew not to beg and whine. And I see kids at the, and I don't want to blame parents either, because it's very predatory the way that these large corporations behave toward children. They know, and in fact, they talk about it. That it's called a nagging event, and the average parent will give in after 5 quote nagging events. So their goal is to get like a billboard or some kind of an ad between you and your children. Like the average car ride is whatever, 10 minutes. They want your child to see 5 or 6 billboards in that time, because each one will provoke a nagging event. And they know that by the time 5 or 6 nagging events have happened, that you will give in and give your child this food. So they're on, like they're very consciously destroying your family to get your children addicted to their junk food. And I just find that so horrendous. And so, I mean, it's sick. And why as a culture, why are we letting them do this to us? Like you'd think when the children were involved that finally there'd be some mass uprising, but To date, not really. So people, we've really got to, like, these people are after us, they're after our money, and they know how to get it, is to interfere with the child parent bond. And it's very predatory. Anyway, my mom tried her best, and she didn't give into any of that, and we knew not to even ask. So it was, that level was just gone. But I was someone, even from a very young age, I was very, very concerned about the environment. I grew up in a very urban, suburban kind of place. And so what I saw out my window was mostly cement and a few trees. And I always, since my earliest memories, I just longed for the wild. I wanted the forest back. I wanted wolves, and I wanted deer, and I wanted running water, and streams and rivers. And like, I just, in my mind, was just this beautiful place, like the Wind in the Willows, or like, the Tolkien books, like the Middle Earth, like it was all magical. And I wanted that forest, and I didn't see it anywhere. I mean, I figured it had to be there somewhere, but it was long gone where I lived. And so I lived with this great amount of grief. And I think that a lot of us do, that we have that love for the natural world because we're animals and this is our home. And so we have that, it's called biophilia, it's just love for life, for the living world, for just the stuff of this planet that is, it's so beautiful and so complex and so magical, and we're killing it. And I couldn't figure out why. Why would anybody take all the trees and kill the deer and hate the wolves? It never made any sense to me. So I don't know if you ever saw the Lorax, the Dr. Seuss book about the last tree. Like, I mean, that just would bring me just sobbing, after that was on television every time. And so that was, that's just who I've always been. And so there's that wound, there's that really deep wound that I think so many of us live with as animals, as biological creatures, when we see the ongoing destruction of everything, of every living creature now is under threat. So I felt that very keenly, even as a very young child. So as a teenager, I was already sort of on the path. Like I desperately wanted to understand why we're humans doing this. What would make us do this? I mean, we've got this one planet. Like, where else are we going to go? It didn't even make any sense. Like, there's no home but this one. So why wreck it? Even if you don't find the beauty and the magic compelling, it's just, factually speaking, where else are you going to go? Like, what's the plan here? And there didn't seem to be one. So I was already trying to figure all that out. Like, what has compelled humans to behave in this way? And so I was reading all kinds of books, and I felt all the things very deeply, and, as teenagers do. And then I met another girl who was a vegan, and her whole family were vegans. So she was all in, and she had all the pamphlets, and she had all the statistics. And I didn't know anything about factory farming. So, when you see those horrendous images of what happens to animals, I was completely convinced. It only took me a week or two of talking to her. And I was like, I think I just have to do this. So it seemed like such a simple solution, because I can do this one thing. It's not difficult. One thing, just remove all the animal products from my diet. It's a simple ask. And I will save animals from these horrible conditions. I will save the planet from these various kinds of destruction. I'll feed all these hungry children around the world, and also I will protect my health. So it didn't seem to be like, it seemed the obvious thing. And so like I said, I was all in, and I became a proselytizer, and I just took it all up, and this is me now. So I had to learn to eat some very strange food that I had never had before, and I had to learn how to cook it all and all of that. And my mom was really upset, which I had to admit in the end that she was right. But she let me do it. And then also my sister joined me. So it was the two of us, teenage vegans. And it didn't go well. So that was how I got in. But that's very common. In fact, that's the number one reason that people become vegetarian or vegan, is that they know somebody who is already doing this and they are convinced. So
I didn't know anyone. I was the first one in my probably entire school. In fact, I wanted not to eat meat when I was probably 9 years old, because we were passing by a butcher shop in the countryside. And I saw the butcher trying to literally pull a lamb off the back of a truck. And the lamb was, I don't know if wailing is the right sound, but that stuck in my head. So when we got home, I knew what was happening. Obviously, I didn't see the rest of it. We were just driving by early in the morning. Of course, now we welcome that sort of, not that particular incident, but, butchers, local butchers, selling fresh meat. We kind of want to see that. And that's what was happening back in, I don't know, probably early 80s at the time. But we went home and I told my mom, now I know where our meat comes from.
Yeah.
I don't want to be eating meat. And she was horrified because she hadn't heard of anything like that. Besides, I was a type 1 diabetic child. And as per the doctor's
Oh, wow.
recommendations, I had to be eating meat because, obviously she wouldn't feed me. Again, there were no junk foods in my house.
Yeah.
But she had to limit the rice and the grains. And so what would I eat? So she
What
was
did you
horrified.
eat?
Well, so she didn't listen to me, fortunately. She said, she fabricated a lie. She said, oh, don't worry, the meat we're getting is not from the butcher. This is all factory made, fake meat.
Okay.
She was ahead of her time. She was ahead of her time. So she made
Wow.
it up, just a white lie. She told me it's all fake meat. This doesn't come from animals, so don't you worry about it. And I was gullible. Kind of part
Well,
of
you
me
were a
believed
kid.
her,
You're
and
going to believe your
part of me
mom,
believed her. And then when I was 19, I decided, oh no, there's no such thing as fake meat. So that's it. So I just stopped eating meat. But so I resonated with your story when you said that. Now I love that you bring up you say clearly in chapter 1 that the solution is perhaps what the Mayans or the Mayan people of South America would have done or would have said. So, okay, so this is in their language. I hope you remember this part in your book.
Yeah, I do.
Their
Yeah.
language, which is, so there is a word that they repeat and they really identify with that word. It's Limal, I think. I hope I'm pronouncing it
I
correctly.
actually have no idea. I've never heard a native speaker say it, so I've only seen it in writing. But yeah, Coslimal, it's something like that.
What does it mean, and why is that the solution?
Well, it means really, if you the shortest translation would be adult knowledge. But to expand on that, what it means is the understanding that every creature is dependent on every other creature, that we all take turns in this cycle that's life, and that for you to be here, for you to live, something else is going to have to die. And that is just the basic algebra of existence, and that we are all dependent on this very tightly interconnected web. It's a very complex web that makes life possible. So millions of creatures are going to die today so that I can have food. And then in another decade or two, I'm going to be dead. And those millions of creatures will then eat me and reincorporate me back up into this cycle. So I will become the redwood tree and the fox with the babies and the mountain lion and, the hawk that I saw yesterday. I saw this amazing little kestrels are one of my favorite birds, American kestrels. And they're tiny, tiny little, they're ferocious little creatures, but they're amazing. And I saw one just hanging out. I was like, that's an American kestrel. Because I don't see them that often. And I knew what it was. I was like, that is an American kestrel. Hawks don't get any smaller. Anyway, I will be part of all of that. And that is, there's solace in that to me, that it's sad for us as humans. It's a thing that humans go through that I'm not sure other animals, maybe elephants. I don't know who else goes through this, but we're aware of our mortality. We know we're going to die. And we are aware of, the cost of just our lives on this planet, that yes, other creatures that we love and that we find amazing and beautiful and magical are going to have to die. And a lot of them are mammals, when you hunt, you have to look you see their beautiful faces and their eyes, and we can't not feel that, we're mammals, and we're sort of pre-programmed to see the face with the big eyes because that's our children. We have an instinctual, very profound instinctual urge to protect that cute face with those big eyes. So I get it. You see a deer or a cow or, pick your food item, It's a beautiful creature with that cute face with the big eyes, and you should love those creatures. I'm not telling anyone not to feel this. You need to feel it. But all feelings aren't necessarily going to be happy feelings. There's this moment of sadness in our lives. And it's a very serious thing. It's a very serious endeavor to take a life. And so we need to be grateful. We need to be humble and grateful and make sure we do it well. And this is why, this, like the Cause Lamal or the other indigenous people that I have, befriended, it's a very serious thing when you hunt, and you have to make sure that that creature doesn't suffer. Like if you were to wound an animal and go back to camp without killing it, you would be treated in a very bad way by your friends and family. It would be very disrespectful, and you would be, contempt is what you would be met with. It's so shameful to wound an animal without killing. So, they would run for days sometimes to hunt down that animal that they had wounded to make sure that it died. Because anything else would be treating that animal with disrespect. Or the point isn't to hurt them, though pain is certainly involved in every death, but to do that as quickly as possible so that there's as little suffering as possible. And, most predators take the wounded. You're not after the big, healthy, strong, whatever. And what you want is the ones that are easy to get. So we're actually doing animals a favor in that regard in the wild. It's what wolves do, it's what bears do, it's what lions do. You're taking the weak. So whoever's already suffering, you're putting an end to that suffering. So nobody suffers long in nature because somebody's always hungry, right? So the moment you have that broken leg, or the moment you get, whatever condition, and you're starting to fail, you're going to be noticed by the predators and you will get eaten. So, I'm not saying it's a pleasant 30 seconds, but it's over quickly. You're not going to suffer for months or years. And that's our job. We are at that level of the trophic pyramid. And that's who generally we would have hunted, back before agriculture. That's how we would have done it. And that's still how many, the hunters that I respect, that's still what they do. So, and there's rules about this. Like, people who have lived in place for thousands of years understand that, this time of the year you can hunt these kinds of creatures, and this time of the year we're better off taking these creatures because we can't wreck the balance. And the balance is really important. How many adult males to how many adult females are in this herd? And different times of year, that's going to be a different number. And if you have spent thousands of years observing and living with these creatures that you're dependent on, you're going to know what those numbers are. And, we've lost all that knowledge. It's the animals are gone, the plains, the grasslands are gone, the forests are gone, and us living in place is gone. So this is all knowledge we're going to have to reassemble to take our rightful place again on this planet. But that's what that means, because you understand all of that. You understand that you're dependent on your human community, that none of us can survive without, the elders and the younger ones, and, your mate and your sisters and whoever. Like, we all need each other to get this done. That humans, especially humans, were born premature because our brains are so big, and we spend many, many years being dependent, and we really are, we're what's called super social. That it's so necessary to have a tribe to raise a human child that one person really can't do it. It's very, very hard for it to be a single mom or a single parent. That really, we do need those 75 other people in our human tribe to do it well, and to make sure nobody goes crazy trying to do it. Humans are dependent for a very, very long time. And if you see other mammals, yeah, they may be born blind, but within 6 weeks, 8 weeks, they're up and running. Humans, it takes years to get us up and running. So all of which is to say, we're dependent on those human relationships as well. So if you read that book by Martin Pichel about his experience with this tribe of people, he's given this impossible task, which is to do this ritual and to provide food for this enormous group of people. And the whole point of giving you this task is that he had to realize, this is how they taught him, he had to realize, oh, I can't do it alone. I have to ask all these people to help me. And that's the moment of adult knowledge. Oh, I need help from all these other beings, whether they're human or other. And therefore, I need to come to this as a very humble person, realizing that I am weak, that there's a part of me that just, and it's okay, that this is all of us. This is every living creature comes to that cycle, comes to this, that web of life saying, I need to be fed, please help. So that's that knowledge. And it helped me to get over the sadness of that knowledge, which is that world gonna die and that my life is dependent on death. It was very, very hard for me. But I had one of my Native American friends. I was going through this whole thing, and I'm, on the verge of tears, trying to explain. I'm so torn with, I don't understand it. Why couldn't I just be a vegan? And she just sort of looks at me with, I mean, some love, but also just slightly like, oh, just pity, like, why don't you know this? And she just said point blank, for something to live, something else has to die. And it was such a relief to hear her say that, like, finally, just put this to rest for me. And I was like, all right, that's one of my moments of just, you grow up. Like, I just feel myself expand to accept this. Okay. And there's going to be sadness, and there's also going to be great joy. And your only job is to do it well. It's like, okay, I can handle this. But it was hard. It was very hard when you've told yourself for 20 years that your life is possible without death. All of this just, it doesn't come easy. So the little bits of information that I found that you could see other people going through this, or they already had a great deal of knowledge, but I just didn't. It soothed my soul. It really helped me find my way forward. So
that was your aha moment to hear that
yeah.
there's no life. In fact, I've chosen that quote somewhere here in my notes. So there's no life. Life is not possible without another creature dying. But also coming back to the ritual of perhaps even all of our ancestral tribes, the ritual also involves sense of gratitude for the animal to have become sustenance for us. So I think that's beautiful too. That gives meaning to the death of that animal. So I love that part of it. Okay, among the many health challenges you faced as a vegan, you mentioned the degenerative joint disease and a few other. What was that like for you? Degenerative joint disease?
So that's one of the things that's permanent. So I started this when I was 16. By the time I was 18, I was in really bad chronic pain in my lower spine, and nobody knew why. So this was the 1980s. They didn't have MRIs yet. So in fact, there wasn't a great way to diagnose me. But it was really hard to get anybody to take me seriously because I was so young. So I went to, various specialists, orthopedists and neurologists and whatever, and they would all just say, you're too young to have back pain. Like this can't be really serious because you're just too young. Yeah, I mean, that's just the whole thing, trying to get help sometimes from the medical profession. I think we all had stories about that. But, eventually the year 1994 comes around, and MRIs have been invented, and now I just have to fight to get one. And then bingo, there it was. So, yeah, so I have a grade 4 derangement at 4 levels of my spine, and the disc just fell to pieces. And now they look at the MRI results, and their first question is always, so you must have been in a massive car accident. I'm like, no. Like, well, what happened? You fell off a roof, you went skydiving. Like, clearly this doesn't just happen to people. And I'm like, well, I'll tell you what I think, because this was the progression of it. I started when I was 16, and by the time I was 18, I had this just life-altering pain, and that's what it was. So my joints fell apart. This is not uncommon among people who do low-fat diets, and particularly vegan diets. It's actually a very common complaint because it simply does not provide the nutrition needed for the proper repair and sustenance for the human body. So I can walk you through step by step exactly what was missing in the diet and how I did this, but that one's permanent. And so I also know that it was the vegan diet because when I stopped being the vegan, it actually got better. I'm never going to be free of pain, but it did actually resolve quite a bit to the point where, I mean, I don't even know how to, by the end of my vegan life, all I could do was lie on the couch or lie in bed. I was in so much pain. And everything that I did standing up or sitting was done in like 60-second increments because I had so little time when I could be upright. So everything was measured in like, okay, I've got 3 minutes. What can I do? I've got 5 minutes. Can I stand in line in the bank long enough to deposit my check, kind of thing? Like, and if the line was too long, I wouldn't do it. I would just go back to the car and lie down. I was like, wait for the line to go down, because I knew that, and once my pain hit a certain level for the day, it wasn't going to go back down. And if I pushed it too far, it could be weeks before it went down to something that was more bearable. So my whole life just revolved around managing this pain. Eventually I was given fentanyl. I was on the fentanyl patch when it first came out. I didn't get addicted to fentanyl. Obviously we've got a problem with that now, but that stuff was amazing. I mean, it really did help the pain. It was pretty much the only thing that ever touched the pain, but I hated being on it. It just made me feel so sick all the time. So, but I'm fentanyl level pain, people. I can get as much fentanyl as I want. I'm one of the people it was invented for. But after stopping the veganism and learning how to, eat appropriate animal sourced foods, figuring out where to find them, figuring out what that meant, getting the omega-3, omega-6 balance correct for inflammation. It took about 2 years, but my pain level started to decrease, and fairly dramatically. So I suddenly realized I could sit up through all of dinner when people came over. I didn't have to go lie on the couch halfway through. Then there was a day I could go to the movies again. I could sit up for an hour and a half. Now I can sit for hours. I mean, I can be on plane rides. I've been across, pretty much across the world. Like, it's 12 hours. I can do it. It's, not a great day the next day, but I can do it, which is, in my life, it's a miracle. So I'm never going to be pain free, but my life is so expanded from what it was. And I just look back, God, I was so young, I was 20, in my 20s and my 30s. I never finished college. I couldn't do it. Like, this really wrecked my life, and living in chronic pain is no fun, especially when there's no relief. I mean, if you're looking at me, I'm in pain. Like, the only time I'm not in pain is if I'm asleep. So this is just it, this is what I did. And then the other thing that happened that was really, was not expecting, but when I went straight up carnivore, which I've been doing for almost 3 years now, it got better again. So just taking out all the plant foods, and like I said, I was not expecting this. But after 3 or 4 months, I suddenly realized I'm in less pain. Like, I've got more mobility. I can bend down. There's only a certain number of times in the day that I can bend over because it puts so much stress on that part of your spine. So it's like, it's always limited. Like, picking up the dog dishes is like number one for the morning. But I suddenly realized I've got more flexibility now. I can bend a lot more and a lot more time. So that was like a whole nother, just a little minor miracle in my life, but it worked. So I think this is probably as good as it gets at this point. But anyway, yeah, I did that. That was permanent. And I have met other people with my exact condition who got it the exact same way. So it's a strange little tribe out here of people who wrecked their spines being vegan. Also, a lot more just generally with the joint trouble, that your joints will fall apart on this diet. So they have hip problems. My sister, it was her knees and her ankles. So yeah, it's very, very common. And if you're listening to this and you're still trying to eat one of these kind of low-fat diets, this is one of the things that I can guarantee will happen. You're going to wake up one morning and every joint in your body is going to ache, and you're not going to know why. So I'm telling you why. This is not an appropriate diet. You're not getting enough minerals. The human body doesn't absorb minerals in the digestive tract if there's no fat present. And really, your best fat to do this is animal fats. Mm-hmm. And there are also fats that are only available in animal products. The plants don't make them. So things like vitamin A and vitamin D, you can only get from animal sourced foods. And vitamin D is like the matrix. It helps lay down the matrix for bones and joints. You just have to have some to get this done. And the other problem is, if you're eating a lot of grain, you're going to be overinflamed because it's all omega-6s. But also, especially the whole grains, and we're also eating, those lovely whole grains and legumes and whatever. So plants don't want to be eaten either. This was hard for me to accept as a vegan. And they fight back. And they don't run because they can't. They're rooted in place. And they don't have teeth, and they don't have claws because they can't really move, not a lot. They do move, but very slowly. So they don't fight back the way that we fight back as animals. The way that they fight back is through chemicals. So they are the original chemical warfare specialists of the planet, because they make all kinds of poisons and, various very disturbing substances, some of them. Very clever. They're very smart about this. So when you're eating a seed, which is what grains and legumes are, it's the seed, it's the baby of the plant. And that plant doesn't want you to eat that baby, because the entire species depends on that baby finding a good spot and growing. And so a lot of biological resources go into that seed. first of all, to give it a good start in life. And that's why we find them yummy, is because they've got lots of stuff in there. But also a lot of toxins so that animals don't eat them. They don't want to be eaten. There's a few, animals and plants have worked together for a long time to form symbiotic relationships. That's kind of what nature is. So there's a very, very few seeds that do in fact need to pass through the tract of various animals, the digestive tract, and that takes off some of the coating, and then the plant can the seed can sprout. So for instance, birds, there's a lot of birds, and berries are made for birds so that that little seed in the middle will get through the bird. And there's mammals too that participate in some of these symbiotic relationships as well. But the point is, yeah, there's a few seeds that were made by the plants so that the animals would eat them and then carry them and then poop them out somewhere else. But you don't want to eat too many of those. As humans, we didn't really evolve in those relationships. So we like a lot of things that birds can eat, a lot of those beautiful red berries will kill us, and birds completely impervious. So, just be careful with this one. But anyway, the way that they fight back is by these chemicals. And so there's just this huge load of toxins and what are called anti-nutrients when you're eating like whole grain bread, for instance. So you're going to have these things called trypsin inhibitors. Trypsin is a digestive enzyme that we need and that is produced when you eat so that you can digest your food. And the plants are saying, you're going to eat me? I'm not going to let you digest me. So you're not going to get your trypsin. Another one is very clever, is soy is very good at this, and it makes, they're endocrine disruptors. So they're phytoestrogens. So it looks very much like estrogen, but it's not quite estrogen. So your body will take it up as if it's estrogen, and then it blocks the estrogen receptors. So you can't get the real estrogen. And in the meantime, it can't do the real job of real estrogen. And what this means is if you're eating a lot of soy, you're going to have fertility problems. It's going to lower your sex drive and also make you infertile. And this is a brilliant stroke on the part of the plant. Oh, you can eat me, but I'm going to make sure you don't survive long term. Like, you're not getting any babies. So there's, a lot of traditional kind of Buddhist and other sort of monks, across Asia who know this about soy. And they were the only people historically who ate soy as a protein source, not just as a condiment, but as an actual chunk of protein. And it's because they knew that the young men especially had a hard time with the sex drive when you're 18 and it's rare, roaring. If you eat a lot of soy, it will depress the sex drive. So it was easier for them to live up to their vows if they were eating a lot of soy for this reason. Anyway, this is what you're doing if you're eating the lovely whole grains. It is going after it's going after your joint. So one of the things that it does is that it will grab onto all of the minerals that are in your digestive tract. So the phytic acid is the name of that one, the phytates, and that's what these seeds come preloaded to do this damage to you. So even if you're eating a whole ton of minerals from other really good sources like red meat, the more whole grain you're eating, the less of those minerals are actually going to make it through the digestive process because of this phytic acid, these phytates. So the plants are essentially grabbing onto all those minerals and making sure you don't get them, to say, you're going to try to eat me, you're going to be weak and debilitated and disabled, and you won't be able to stand up and run or do anything useful for humans if you continue to eat me. So that's how they fight back. So these whole grains are just loaded with this stuff, and then just out and out toxins too. I mean, ricin, that horrendous poison, is made from castor beans. That's a legume. Legumes are not edible unless you process them, like, for days. And if you eat them without cooking them, you will die. There were very famously these young boys in the UK who died from eating kidney beans without cooking them. I think it was in the 70s. Yeah. They're just toxic substances like legumes. You just don't want to go near that stuff. And we've been told now, by our public health agencies for decades, oh, this is the happy, healthy, wonderful diet. And it's like, no, they're trying. Anthony Chafee, Dr. Anthony Chafee, I highly recommend his YouTube, but he has this great slogan, plants are trying to kill you. And he has a whole YouTube talk that he does about this. And it's great. He will just walk you through all of this, but you'll learn a lot. But one of the things that I could see what I had done to myself was, I'm not getting enough minerals anyway, because you can't just eating plants. You have to eat some meat to get enough minerals. But even the minerals I was getting, of course, got sucked right out of my body by the phytic acid in the whole grains, because I didn't eat any white flour the whole time. I was not a junk food vegan. I was like hardcore. If there was any white flour in the bread or the pasta or what, I wouldn't touch it. I was like, nope, that's not the good food. I only ate the whole grain, whatever. And this was this is where it ended. It was like I got no minerals for 20 years. So yeah, my joints just degenerated. So
I think personally, what saved me was the fact that I was a vegetarian. So
yeah, so you were getting,
a lot of dairy, I was eating
yeah,
eggs. So
absolutely.
that definitely saved me.
Hmm.
Also, the fact that I was not low fat,
Right.
high fat diet. So high fat vegetarian diet. Yes,
Absolutely.
I
You were less.
ate
Yeah.
grains. I ate bread that I made at home with
Yeah.
the
Yeah. Yeah.
best quality flour that I would
Yep.
pay a fortune for. But I ate fat, animal fats, and I also ate obviously some animal proteins. So, so all of the nutritional information is in chapter 4. We kind of jumped over chapter 3, but you cover it extensively, and you even like start from Africa 7 million years ago, where human life began. Yeah, I love that. So, somewhere again in chapter 4, you mention how Pablo Picasso, when he was viewing a cave
Hmm.
art,
Hmm.
I think it was somewhere in France, right?
Let's go. Yeah.
He said, "We have invented nothing in
Nothing.
12,000 years." Like that. That's there in chapter 4. So what was he talking about?
So if you go and look at the cave art, any of it, from around the world, from Indonesia straight through Europe, you're going to find amazing, amazing pictures that are complex and beautiful and three-dimensional and tell a story. Up until that point, humans or our progenitors drew symbolic things, and they're very intriguing to us. We're not sure necessarily what they mean, but all kinds of spirals and triangles and hand shapes, and they try to interpret what these might mean, little meanders and chevrons, and is it about water? Is it about life? Is it about birth? Like what? They're fascinating. Some of them are clearly very female. A lot of vulvas essentially. Like we know where life comes from, and it's an amazing miracle to experience. And so a lot of that is in the cave art. But then there comes this moment where we start telling stories, and we start doing really. They're not symbolic, but they're representational. So now you have the real cave art, and we did carvings as well. So you can find little bone carvings at some of these sites. And we had two main art projects, and one was the megafauna, and the other was the mega females. And I think this is the beginning of religion because that's who gave us life. And this is some attempt from that the beginning of the human brain. It gets big enough to have these amazing experiences, trying to come to consciousness and figure out, well, what is our place here? What does this all mean? And it this is it. This is life, and it's such an amazing experience for humans to be conscious of this. And so over and over and over again, we draw the same thing. We draw the megafaunas. We draw the animals that are feeding us, and we draw hunting scenes very specifically over and over again. One of the most common art things that you're going to see in cave art is scenes of hunting, and some of them are really very evocative. Like the oldest hunting scene we know of is in Indonesia in a cave, and it's this little creature. I'm trying to remember what the name is. It's basically a mini buffalo. When you see them in real life, they're basically the size of like a large goat. They're not big like the American bison, but I mean they're related. And in this scene, there's these the creature that's being hunted is enormous in the scene, and the little human figures around it that are doing the hunting are just minuscule. And it really reminds me of that art that is the sort of that Japanese traditional art where there's like a huge mountain and a little tiny person, or that enormous wave and the little tiny person. And the point is, like, nature is this overwhelming experience, and humans are tiny. And we need to remember that we're tiny, and this is how we experience the wonder of it all. Is that we are so tiny compared to the vastness and the beauty of it. And it's that same sense of like these tiny little people hunting, because in real life, these creatures just aren't that big. They're not like elephants. They're really just, they're sort of medium size. And also the humans are what are called therio something. And what it means is they are half human, half animal. So some of them have human bodies and bird heads or mammal heads, and some of them are the opposite, where they have um, a, a an animal body and a human head, and they're hunting this other animal. And I think this is such a clear. I just think this one is not hard to explain. It's like we are animals and yet we are human. and we need to eat. And so here's this overwhelming experience of having to kill, and I need to express this somehow. I need to say thank you. So I'm going to show what we do, and I'm going to show that we are still animals. We still understand that we are part of the animal world. We're not actually separate from it, because we have bird heads and we have mammal heads, and also we have mammal bodies and bird bodies. So we are still part of this, like this flow of animals, that's like evolution, and we're still one of them. And yet we have to do this thing where we kill this other animal. So I'm going to try to draw this as beautifully as I can, because I'm compelled to understand this experience. So this is what you see is the cave art. Overwhelmingly, the animals that are reproduced are the ones that we ate, and a very common story that's told is that we have to hunt them. And so you'll see all kinds of religious motifs around this that we don't know how to make sense with, but like you'll see women drumming, for instance, people clearly in a trance state, with a bird head, clearly having some kind of shamanic experience. Like, what does it mean? I mean, I wasn't there, I don't know, but it again, they're very evocative. And if you stare at them long enough, you really feel like you're entering a different world. So Let's Go is the famous cave in France that was discovered by 3 little boys who just by accident, found this cave, and it had been there for thousands of years, and no human had been down there. And they have a model now where you can walk through. They reproduced it so that humans could experience it. They don't let people in because our breath, the moisture was destroying it. It was getting covered in mold from people seeing it. But Pablo Picasso was one of the people who was let in to see it. And he very famously said on the way out, we have invented nothing, meaning, there's this huge scope of art, world art, even Western art around. It was all there, like the beauty and the passion to try to make sense of the universe. We were already doing it, and we were doing it beautifully. And it's like you said, we've invented nothing, because he was so moved by what he saw. So this is where it started, and these were the things that we drew, because these were the things that were the overwhelming, compelling, magical experiences that we have as humans.
I was just thinking that the representation of half human, half animal characters is probably symbolic of us being the same as all other animals. We are all but one, so we depend on each other for survival. Coming back to chapter 3, you start off with the apple tree. These are my favorite parts of the book. Now, chapter 3, Lierre starts with the apple tree, and she says, apples eat animals too. So this is a quote from you. You say, so this is before your transformation. So you say that you would have said, or you would have thought, that I won't eat anything that has a mother or a face.
Right.
That was you in the past. So what's that? So how do apples eat animals?
So I mean, I think that it that I won't eat anything with a mother or a face really speaks to our mammalian. Sorry, my dogs are barking. I'm just letting them all out. There we go. There's probably coyotes out there. This is so primal to us because, like I said before, we're so dependent for so long, and we bond with the little face with the big eyes. And that's a wonderful thing about us. Like, we feel that endorphin rush when we see. That's why we love dogs and cats and have to have them around. It's why everybody goes, oh, when they see a baby, and like, please let me hold it. We all get that rush from it, and that's good. That's a wonderful thing about us, that we love our young and we protect our young, and that extends outward. And I love those stories about, oh, there was a baby goat whose mother died, but the farm dog was nursing, and so she took the baby goat. And then you see this amazing photograph of like this baby goat nursing on a dog, and the dog is like, there's enough for everyone. I love you too. You have big eyes and a cute face, so why not? And then the dog raises the goat with her puppies. And you will see that across nature. Like, that mammal instinct, that mother instinct, is so primal that we just do this as mammals. So, and that's a good thing. Like, we should celebrate that. We should put that at the center of our culture and our values. This is who we are. So I don't think it's weird that, as a vegan, I said that. I didn't really understand why it was important as a mammal that those were the things that mattered. I just knew that I felt it very strongly, and that, good on me. We should feel that. But if you take a step back from your emotions around it and just think about it, more from your head, more intellectually, like, why is that what matters? Because every living creature loves its life. So what I'm doing is I'm saying the creatures that are like me in this particular way are the ones that matter. But there's every other life form, which is most of them, the vast majority of them, don't have mothers and don't have faces. And they do the basic work of life. They do things like photosynthesize. Without them, none of us would be here. Or they're bacteria that break down dead matter and recycle it back up into life. There would be none of us would be here without the bacteria of the soil. So none of them have mothers or faces. They do ultimately. A tree certainly, the seed comes from somewhere, but they don't have mothers that take care of them particularly. Usually the seeds are just scattered. So you're on your own, kids, for most plants. So why did that matter? And I was like, okay, so it matters because I don't want to eat animals. So I'm going to say that this is an overriding value, but it doesn't actually make a whole lot of sense. Like, it's leaving out most of the cycle of life and most of that web. So I took great solace when I realized that plants eat animals. And a lot of this I had to discover trying to grow my own food, because all of my little forays into organic gardening, I would run up against that same wall each time, which was, how do you keep the soil fertile? You're doing this very unnatural thing when you garden. When you essentially do farming, you're clearing the land, because that land doesn't want to be a garden and it doesn't want to be a wheat field. It wants to be either a forest or a grassland. And so you have to destroy that in order to have your garden or your wheat field. And I had a very hard time. This was the angel I wrestled when I was a vegan, because I didn't want that to be true. I didn't want to understand the nature of agriculture, that it was really a war against the living world. So I got out there and I dug up all the grass and I pulled up all the saplings and I made this little plot. I got other people to do some of this for me, but the land was cleared. A little section of land was cleared. And then I used sort of permaculture, and I did the cardboard and the rotten hay and all this. And then the more I read, the more I could see that, I was going to have to add amendments to the soil, because the creatures that should be there building the soil, I had removed them all. So now I was going to have to replace all that. And I could use fossil fuel. I could buy things that were animal free and get chemical nitrogen, or the other option was, or I was going to have to get manure.
Yeah.
And I could, same thing, I could get like ground up rock powders and use those for the minerals, but I couldn't fool myself about that. Like, there's no way to sustainably harvest rock. Like, there's no way this doesn't involve massive amounts of, mining and heavy lifting with diesel equipment and grinding up rock. Like, I can't physically grind rock. Come on, people. You're using equipment to do this. And then it's heavy and it has to be transported. So I couldn't pretend that this was ever going to be sustainable to use those kinds of things. But I could get things like blood meal and bone meal really cheap, really right there, made in my neighborhood, essentially. And the manure was everywhere. I lived in a rural area. So if I wanted cow or goat or chicken, all I had to do was ask the neighbors, essentially. And so I was at it was a terrible quandary as a vegan. Like, well, okay, I can destroy my soil slowly. I can see that this is going to happen because I've deforested, essentially. I've done the thing that I never wanted to do. I wanted the forest back. And here I was in the backyard, removing all the life from that land in order to be a pure, wonderful, sustainable, life-loving vegan. It was like, I just deforested. Like, I know what this is. And I couldn't make sense. Like, I couldn't make it come together in my brain. It was like, no, you're vegan. This is the good food. This is the food that loves animals. You have to keep going. You can't stop and think about this. So I went ahead and I tried to have this garden, and then eventually it was like, no, I got to put some nitrogen in there, and I need minerals. So I had friends that had goats, and I was like, okay, well, I'll just go to their barn and they'll shovel it into the pickup truck for me. So I got this huge load of manure, and it was amazing. The vegetables were huge and they were beautiful. And I did all that, but every single time I went out into that garden, I had to realize that I was killing things.
Yeah.
Even just the ants, the slugs, like the people love the slug story, but that was true. Like, I'm not making it up. I did all that crazy stuff to try to kill as little as possible. And at the end of the day, it was like Martin Truschell having that experience with the Cos Lamall, or it's like it just had to collapse on me. I was like, this is just not possible.
Yeah.
I'm running from the truth here, and I can't do it anymore. I have to stand and face this. This is the cost of my existence. And that's the only option we get, is to do it badly or to do it well. But it was a hard, because I really did try everything and it just didn't work.
And at the end, you said, my garden wanted to eat animals, even if I didn't.
Exactly.
The same
And
happened.
the apple tree at the beginning was, I love that story, because so it's an old apple tree, I think in Rhode Island, which is in the eastern part of the United States. And they were moving a graveyard for some reason, or they had to do construction or something. And what they found was that the apple tree in the graveyard took the exact form of the humans that had been buried near it, that the roots grew into, the decayed caskets, and then like just literally ate the bones of over time. This wasn't going to happen in a season, but over many, many decades, that's what the apple tree did. So when they had to move this, had to open it up, they found these roots that looked just like basically a human skeleton of the two people who had been buried there. And it was like, this is plants eating animals. Like, this is just what it is, Lierre. Like, you can do this too. It's all right. Everybody's eating somebody. You don't have to feel bad about this anymore. But it was rough. But anyway, that was the apple tree part of it.
Yeah, I that resonated with me too, because I kept a garden here of all places in London. And again, I realized nothing would grow naturally, especially that we don't have enough sunshine either, if I didn't add manure and crushed up fish bones and bone meal and whatever to the soil, which I would add continuously.
Yeah.
I had the most delicious tasting vegetables, but they were feeding on
animals. So there's dead animals in everything you eat. If the food is worth eating, there's dead animals in it.
So let's move on to, okay. So you talk extensively about how agriculture killed many human civilizations, and you go back to the city of Utica, or I don't know if that's the correct pronunciation, and you cite many other Greek cities, and all the way from the Phoenicians, and how it destroys civilizations. Can we just cover that very, very briefly?
Sure.
How
does
agriculture destroy civilizations?
So first you have to realize what civilization is, and so all humans make culture. So it's not culture; it's one very specific pattern of human settlement, and it's people living in cities. Because that's literally what civitatis is the Greek word for city, and that's what this comes from. So it's Latin. Anyway, it just means people living in densities that require the importation of resources. That's what a city is. You cannot live on that land and that number of people and expect that land to support you. There's too many people. Okay. So the stuff has to come from somewhere else. The food, the water, the energy, you've got to go out and get those and bring those back in. And that's because you've destroyed your land. It's because think about any city, even a town, think about it. All those people living there, it's just covered in concrete or stone or bare dirt or whatever. There's not enough land to support all those people. So all the stuff has to come from somewhere else. And this is the problem. So up until that point in human society, as beings on this planet, we lived like every other creature. We took our nourishment from inside living communities. So, your biosphere, you're like, I live here in the redwoods now, and here's this, the trees and the rivers and all this. There would have been salmon here. There would have been so many fish in these rivers before they put in the dams 100 years ago. I could have literally just walked down to the bottom of my property once a day, put in a net, grab some fish. That was my food for the day. And I could have lived on that forever and been very, very happy and healthy. And that was how we all lived until very recently. So then along comes this thing called agriculture. So in about 14 different places over a few thousand years, humans took up this entirely different way of life. So this is what agriculture is. You take a piece of land and you clear every living thing off it, and I mean down to the bacteria, and then you plant it just for humans. So all those plants and animals have nowhere to go. You have taken their home by force, and you will continue to try to take it because every year they want to come back, and every year you're going to have to fight them off. And that's what the plow is destroying all the plants that want to come back and make homes for all the animals that would also like to come back. And instead we're saying, no, we're not going to share it. So the average hunter-gatherer in a temperate climate, it might take about a square mile to support one human. But if you're doing agriculture, you can do that with an acre or two. And that's because you're not sharing that land with anybody. Nobody else is there. It's just you and your wheat. So that's it. So the problem is this is inherently destructive. First of all, all those creatures they're gone. It's just mass extinction. And this is why every single day 200 species go extinct on this planet. And that's accelerating. And this is why. It's because we've taken all the land. By 1950, mammalian vertebrate evolution had come to a halt because there simply wasn't enough space left for the animals to actually do their thing. So we've stopped evolution by doing this because we've taken all the land. That should scare everyone, and it doesn't seem to, but it should. That seems to me a rather terrifying fact. And so anyway, every time you do this, not only are you killing all the plants and the animals, but you're destroying the soil. And that's the basis of land life. So year by year, you have less and less soil because when the soil is exposed, it dies. It's an emergency situation for the biome. It's not supposed to be cleared. It only happens when there's an emergency like a flood or a fire or something, and nature knows how to handle it. But we are making that, we are perpetuating this emergency year after year after year around the globe. There's no more continents left. We've blown through all the topsoil. And we pretty much ran out of topsoil by the year 1950. What we've been eating instead is oil because the scientists figured out this thing called the Haber-Bosch process, and we figured out how to make usable nitrogen from oil and gas. And that's literally what we've been eating ever since. Not a plan with the future, people. It's not good. The future's not looking good if we don't come to grips with this. But that's what agriculture is. So temporarily you have a surplus, and this is the point. With that surplus, you can then support the city. And that's what cities depend on, is the countryside. So it's always this parasitic relationship where they are getting the resources as a bloated power center at the middle of it, and they go out into the countryside and they conquer the people there and they take all their stuff. So they become serfs, they become slaves. They're beholden now. They have to, give tribute to the emperor or the king or whoever it is at the center. But the city has to do this because they have no other way to get the food and the energy and the water and whatever. It all has to come from the hinterland. So that's been the pattern now for the last, maybe 10,000 years. This is what humans have been doing. And everywhere that agriculture has sprung up, that eventually you get to this point where you've got the bloated power center, you've got the conquered colonies, you have to be militaristic because it's all based on war. You have to conquer people. They're not just going to hand you their food. You got to conquer their lands, take it in to become yours. The deforestation continues, the agriculture continues, because this is how you're feeding everybody now. But it's always about drawdown and overshoot. You've got too many people. You're drawing down the water, the soil, the trees, the animals. Eventually, you're going to hit zero, and then the whole thing collapses. So you can follow civilization around the Mediterranean, where you've got the Mesopotamians, and then you've got the Phoenicians, and then you've got the Egyptians, and then the Greeks, and then the Romans. And bit by bit, you're watching the same pattern where there's this bloated power center, and then they conquer the region, and then the whole thing collapses. Civilizations last between 800 and 2,000 years, literally until the soil gives out, and then the whole thing goes into decline. And this is grim, but the last proteins in the cooking pots are generally human, which is to say everyone is starving and they're eating the corpses. Not a pleasant thing to have to consider, but this is what happens all around the globe, every civilization. There've been 34, they've all ended the same way. The only reason this one has gone on so long is, like I said, fossil fuel. We've managed to extend it and we've globalized it. So it's going to be catastrophic when it comes. This collapse is not going to be pretty. I'm not out of hope. We can use our brains and apply them to this situation. There's not any physical reason that we couldn't draw back from this before it's too late. It's all political. We seem to lack the political will because the analysis is a little bit rough. I understand it's emotionally challenging to face all these things, but we don't really have a choice. It's either this or we're going to kill everything, and that includes humans. So even if you only care about humans, you should you should be thinking about this, because the future, if we don't change course quickly, there are hopeful, we could get out of this. Like we absolutely, there are ways out of this, but we're all headed in the wrong direction is the problem. And this is one of the reasons ultimately that I wrote the book, is because I want the people who care most about the planet to understand the nature of the problem and the way out of it. And they don't. Like way too many of them still think that veganism is the answer to all of this, and it's not. It's literally where the problem begins, is agriculture. That's the thing we have to stop doing. And they are handing us instead this plant-based diet as if it's a solution. And I want them, I know they care so passionately about animals, and they really do care about this planet. They have the same set of values that I have. They care about justice and compassion and human hubris as the core problem here. But they don't have the right information. So I want them on our side. I want them to be fighting for the correct thing instead of the thing that's never going to help and is only going to destroy their health.
Yeah. Talking of mass agriculture, you say 2/3 of the Earth's land is unsuited for annual crops. And it's either too wet, too dry, too hot, too cold, or too steep to even try. So, and we're forcing it. It's like forced mass agriculture. It is grim, but I was pleased to hear that there is some hope. How do we fight the misinformation? In fact, it was interesting to read the Canadian, I think he was Canadian anthropologist and author Richard Borschi-Lee, when he published his study on hunter-gatherers. He said that, or hunter-gatherer sort of societies, he said that 65% of their calories were from plants and only 35% were from animals. But then when you look at the studies, and there were 181 hunter-gatherer societies at the time, and he only picked 58.
Yeah.
Study. And the other thing that fascinated me was that so fish was not included as animal food.
Right.
And the other thing was that shellfish was counted as gathering rather than hunting. And so, of course, the study results are going to be too accurate.
It's so amazing how ideological we can all be. I'm sure that I have done this. I mean, I'm human. I'm sure that I fall for this as well. But we do confirmation bias. We look for the information that will already support the conclusion that we want to make. And even when they're out in the field, you've got scientists doing the same thing. And we just really need to be very, very aware of our tendency towards confirmation bias. You clearly want to make a point, so you're just going to pick the data that suits. And this is why in science, it has to be replicable. Other people have to come up with the same thing for it to be settled as a fact. And, those kinds of studies, it's based on lies, ultimately. And I don't know this man. I've got no idea what he was trying to do. But, when you're saying that birds and eggs and fish and shellfish and insects and reptiles don't count as animal food, but you're going to put them in the plant category, come on. Like, that's not reasonable. Like, no reasonable person thinks that actually counts as gathering plants. It's not.
Yeah, I think Dr. Michael Eads certainly counted, those studies, and you mentioned him as well. So, so we all want. I mean, this is how you end the book. You do acknowledge that we all want to save the world, but the vegetarian solution is a myth based on ignorance. Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to have to stop doing agriculture. We are going to, this is where the war begins, and we have to stop doing it. We need to pull back from thinking that we have a right to take over a piece of land and just use it for us. Like, that level of human hubris is what's destroying the planet. And that's the activity where it starts. So I know that the vegans care about this. I absolutely understand that they care about this, because I was one, and I haven't changed what I care about, but I think they need better information. They need to understand the nature of this problem, that the planet doesn't want to be a wheat field or a cornfield or a soy field. It wants to be a prairie or a forest or a wetland. And we need to restore. We need to let it all come home. The trees want to come back. The grasses want to come home. The earth would absolutely love to get our wetlands back, so we need to stop destroying them. And it means we're going to have to eat a very different diet than what the vegans are eating.
What diet do you eat currently?
Well, I'm a carnivore. I only eat meat, and that has worked for me. I had 3 autoimmune diseases, and I'm in complete remission as long as I stick to the plan. So none of those plant toxins were doing me any good. It was the plants that were trying to kill me. Um, but yeah, and I'm lucky because I live in a rural area, and I think the most important thing that people can do, like if you want personally, on a personal level, what can I do to help? The most important thing is to find the farmers in your area who are using pasture-based farming, grass-based farming, and buy things from them. And a lot of times they'll let you come visit. They really, really want people to understand it, and they want you to be a part of it, and they want you to see that it is good. So you can go to these farms and you can see that the animals are happy, and you can watch year by year as they grow soil. The topsoil will get deeper and deeper and deeper because that's what perennial grasses do. And they do it with animals. They can't do it without animals. They come as a community. You have to have ruminants on there. But then it works and the world is restored. So one of the biggest things that's happening on these farms is they're sequestering carbon. This is the only way that we're going to stop global warming. Is global warming actually starts when people begin agriculture. This is the thing people don't understand. And I'm not trying to, apologize for fossil fuel here. I'm not making any excuses. If you look from the year 1800 to now, it's got what's called the hockey stick graph, where the carbon goes way up. It was a huge accelerant. I mean, that's a thing. I'm not in denial about this. That was bad. But if you back that graph up 6,000 years, you'll see the same amount of carbon was released. So it was slower, but this is what happens when you destroy soil. I mean, soil is just carbon. And when it is released, when you burn through it, like literally by adding oxygen to it, it has nowhere to go but up. So all of that carbon went into the atmosphere. And the only times that it started to come down was during the Black Death across Eurasia, when all these populations crashed by half and all the forests started to take over again and took over all the agricultural fields. There's a dip in that carbon. That's the only time. It's because there weren't enough people to keep doing it. And a lot of the land was reclaimed by the forest. So you see a little dip in carbon, and that was why. So the Black Death did more for for the planet. It's a scary thought. Anyway, so yeah, so go to these local farms and make sure they're grass-based, and go see how happy the animals are, and help those farmers. Buy your food directly from them, and they usually will have it rotated with birds because that makes everybody healthier. So there'd be chickens or geese or ducks or whatever, and you can buy your eggs there, and you can also buy the meat of those birds. Spend every dime that you have that's extra on getting the really, really good quality food, because it's not just good for you. You are repairing the world. You are sequestering carbon. You're building soil. When they do this kind of, grass-based farming, there's so many other animals that can now come home to live there too. They can't live in the cornfield or the wheat field, but they can live in a perennial grassland. So, and there'll be a lot of trees there too, usually, because cows do better in like a savanna where there are some trees, so there's some shade for them. So you have a mixed grassland, like a savanna situation where there's some trees and a lot of grass. You'll have so many more animals because the trees are really, really good for all kinds of birds and small mammals. So you'll see just a huge flood of animals that can come back. And if the farmers are really committed to this kind of worldview, what they'll have is something like what I have, the Great Pyrenees dogs, who will protect the livestock from predators without killing them. So you don't need to go on a rampage against wolves or bears or coyotes. You can live in peace with them. And in Africa, they use dogs for to protect them from lions. And it's the same principle. We don't actually want to hurt the predators. We need them. The web of life needs these creatures, and they deserve to exist. So we don't have to kill them. We don't have to live in opposition to them. We can learn just to deter them by having these amazing, huge dogs that know how to do their job. The predators, they're not in it to get hurt. Like if there's enough resistance, they'll just move on to easier prey. I mean, it's not actually that hard to do this. So yes, all of that life can come back, and you're also restoring the water table on the local waterways, because the soil is now being protected once more. It's got permanent cover and it's got permanent roots in place. And that's literally what holds the soil there. So the soil can now repair itself and start to grow, start to up and again, start to deepen. But what that means is that the rain can now enter the soil, because you all know this is true, whether you've thought about it or not. if you go to a piece of bare ground, like a parking lot, any place where there's no grass growing and it's raining, you're going to see a mud puddle. That's just going to be a muddy mess to have to walk through to get out of your car, to get into the store or whatever. That's what's going to be there. And that's why people pave, because otherwise it's a muddy mess. So they're not making it any better by paving. I mean, not for the planet, but you understand why people do it. It's because otherwise it's just mud and then you slip and fall and it's hard to walk through. That's because there's no grasses there. It's because there's no trees there. The rain, the water has literally no way to enter the soil without the roots. It's the roots that make the physical channels that let the water actually enter the soil. And that means that the water table has no way to restore itself. There's no way for it to fill back up. So the water just keeps dropping. And this is really catastrophic in some places, because at a certain point, it reaches a level where even the trees can't get to it. And then all the trees die because they can't get to the water anymore. This is how they're used to watering themselves, and they can't find water anymore because the water table. And this is really a very, very serious problem around the world. I mean, the more you look into it, it's rather scary. There's plenty of places now where they're using oil drilling equipment to get to the last of the water. And it's because there's no way for it to fill back up, because there's just nothing but annuals and the roots aren't deep enough. So this is what we did by destroying the grasses and the forests. And so it also means that the local, whatever stream or little rivers are nearby, there's no water for them either. And so there's no fish and there's no place for the animals to drink. And you're just slowly turning the place into a desert. And this is why, many people have noticed that forests precede us and deserts dog our heels. This is the ultimate, this is where it ends, is with deserts. So if you go to the places where agriculture first started, so, across, like Ethiopia, the Mediterranean region, what was Mesopotamia, Egypt, across to India, to China, anywhere that agriculture first started, it's just being turned into a desert. And like many Americans will certainly have seen pictures of Iraq because of this horrible war, that America but we don't need to get into all that. But we've all seen photographs on the news of what it looks like there. And it's basically a desert with some rocks. It didn't always look that way. It used to be an oak forest so thick that sunlight never touched the ground. And all of that was cleared away so that people could grow wheat. And then there were cities, city-states that then conquered and grew more wheat. And then the wheat spread, and eventually it gets into Europe. And you can follow the whole spread across Europe of wheat. And it's not a desert yet, but it will be. Italy, everybody thinks of, we go on holiday in Italy, and it's like sort of craggy rocks with sort of goats and some shrubby things. Like, that's not what it's supposed to look like. It was a forest. This is after thousands of years of agriculture and some imperialism. You had imperial Rome. This is a human invention. And all of that desert across North Africa, it's human made, and we need to repair it. So that's, anyway, it can be repaired. I mean, the thing is that if you get the grasses and the ruminants back in there, very quickly you can restore this land. And there's people doing it. So I really highly recommend Alan Savory's work. If you want hope, go look at what he does. And there's millions of acres now that are under his tutelage, millions of acres. And it's amazing to watch. I'm sorry, go ahead.
What was the name?
Alan Savory, Savory. And he's an amazing human being he's the one who figured out really how to do this, how to use ruminants and grasses to restore places that have just been wrecked by agriculture, mostly because he loved the wildlife. He's from Southern Africa, from Zimbabwe area, and he loved the animals there so much, really just loved the land, and he could see that it was being destroyed. And they were on the wrong track completely. So he sat and thought about it a long time, and he figured this out bit by bit. But he's really the go-to guy for this. But millions of acres now are being repaired and being changed literally from desert back into just these lush, thriving grasslands or savannas, to the point where his study center in Zimbabwe, where they're using these methods, they have more elephants now living there than the wildlife refuge, the national sanctuary next door, that's supposed to be there for elephants. They have more elephants now in the restoring place than they do next door, because they've let the grasses and the ruminants do their thing. And the humans can live there. They have a perfectly good source of nutrition now, which is, their cattle. But done correctly, it restores the world. So this is the hope. I mean, this is what I mean. There's hope. And we don't need some kind of crazy Elon Musk technology. We don't need to go to Mars. We don't need to throw aerosols up into the atmosphere. None of that. We just need to let the grasses and the ruminants come home. That's literally it, people. We can get this done.
I love that message of hope. And Lierre, I'm going to wrap this up, but if you don't mind, I really want to read a passage and end it with that passage from the book. So here it goes, people. So here are the questions you should ask. A new form of grace to say over your food. Does this food build or destroy topsoil? Does it use only ambient sun and rainfall, or does it require fossil soil, fossil fuel, fossil water, and drained wetlands, damaged rivers? Could you walk to where it grows, or does it come to you on a path slick with petroleum? Everything falls into place with those three questions. And people, go buy the book and everything will most certainly fall into place. I highly recommend that you get the book and read it. Lierre Keith, I cannot thank you enough.
Oh, well, thank you. Here's my little heart.
I love that so much. Thank you so much.